Oh, this is open? Asian.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Lives Matter Passion in Action, a greatest conversation with Alicia Garza. My name is Vince Nims, and I'm the Assistant Director of Liturgy, Prayer, and Faith Formation for the Mission and Ministry Center here at St. Mary's. We are honored to have Alicia here this evening. Alicia arrived on campus earlier and enjoyed dinner and conversation with students, staff, and faculty. Some of you may have been present with her. Alicia's visit to St. Mary's is sponsored by the Black Student Union, CILSA, Greatest Conversations, the Intercultural Center, the Leadership Studies programs, the St. Mary's College Library, the Mission and Ministry Center, and the Student Engagement and Academic Success Organization and Office. Tonight's presentation will be approximately 2 hours, including a panel as well as an open forum for questions and answers. All of these elements are essential to the program. SMC students will be given preference with regard to the question and answer period. Out of respect for our guest speaker and to limit any interference with our sound system, please do not use your phone to send text messages or to take photographs during the presentation. And at this time, we also ask you to please and kindly silence or turn off all electronic devices. And now, as is our tradition at St. Mary's, let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. And let us remember that we are a people created by love, in order that we may love each other, and that we are called to love all of humanity. Let us be mindful there is no such person as a stranger, just brothers and sisters. Let us also be reminded by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So let this event be sacred and full of good and just intentions. Let us be present to our sacredness during this time. Amen. St. John Baptist de La Salle, live Jesus in our hearts. At this time, I'd like to invite Tammy Appling-Kabading of St. Mary's College's Leadership Studies programs to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Vince. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I am honored to welcome and introduce Alicia Garza tonight. Before I introduce Alicia, I want to share a few words. This is a very important conversation for our country. We all have experienced hearing the news. We've had our own emotions triggered. This past weekend, the nation marked 50 years since the violent crackdown on peaceful marchers in Selma, Alabama, known as the Bloody Sunday. Last week, the Department of Justice report condemned the Ferguson Police Department's patterns and practices of racial discrimination. This conversation is important. This conversation is important to the entire St. Mary's community. Students, faculty, staff, and administrators need to be in this conversation in a sustained way. I am grateful for each and every one of you who are present this evening. Thank you for making this a moment in time that you want to spend in this space. I want to especially honor our students who have organized campus demonstrations and dialogues throughout the year, last year and this year, and as recently as last night. On December 4th, St. Mary's College students led a powerful demonstration in protest of the non-indictment of the NYPD officer for the chokehold death of Eric Garner. This was actually my first protest that I've ever been involved in. And it was such a powerful experience. It inspired and captivated me and ignited this power that was inside of me that I didn't realize was truly there. The demonstration inspired me to partner with students and colleagues to make tonight possible. This conversation is important to me personally because I am a mother of 2 black males. One is here tonight. And as I was thinking over and reflecting over my life as a mother, I remember the moment in time when they told me, my husband and I, that we would have a baby. And there was a wonderful, deep joy that I experienced. There was also the joy of knowing that I was having a son. And then there was this deep fear that stuck in my spirit from that moment forward, because I knew that my son would be in a society that was going to judge him by the color of his skin. So as a mother, I'm not comfortable until my son walks through the door. And he wonders, Mom, why are you worrying? I'm worrying because I'm not sure if my son would come back alive. Even though my son, and we live in a nice neighborhood, there's that fear. And no mother should have to feel that fear. So, this conversation is important to me. Now please allow me to introduce Alicia, who will lead in this conversation. Alicia Garza is a co-founder of Black Lives Matter, which began as a hashtag and grew into a national organizing project that is an affirmation and embrace of the resistance and resilience of Black people. She is currently the Special Projects Director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance, the nation's leading voice for dignity and fairness for the millions of domestic workers in the United States, most of whom are women. Garza previously served as Executive Director of People Organized to Win Employment Rights, also known as POWER, in San Francisco. Under her leadership, POWER won free local public transportation for youth, fought for a seat at the table in some of the most important land use decisions affecting working class families, beat back regressive local policies targeting undocumented people, organized against the chronic police violence in Black neighborhoods, and shed light on the ongoing wave of profit-driven development that contributed to a change in San Francisco. She has been the recipient of multiple awards for her organizing work in Black and Latino communities, receiving the Local Hero Award from the San Francisco Bay Guardian and the Jean Gannott Communicate Justice Award from the Center for Media Justice. She has twice been honored by Harvey Milk Democratic Club with the Bayard Rustin Community Activist Award for her work fighting gentrification and environmental racism in San Francisco's largest remaining Black community. Garza currently serves on the Board of Directors for the School of Unity and Liberation, known as SOUL, in Oakland, California, and she's contributing and is a contributing writer for War Times magazine. She serves as a trusted counsel for organizations across the country looking to build their capacity to lead and win organizing campaigns. When she's not scheming on freedom, Alicia enjoys dancing, reading, and writing, and scheming some more. Please join me in giving a warm St. Mary's welcome to Alicia Garza.
Hey.
Hi.
How y'all doing?
So,
Good? Yes. Wow, there's a lot of people in here. If some of you in the back want to come up here and come kick it, you can. I won't bite, and I showered today. Great. So thank you so much. Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for having dinner with me and sharing your experiences and your hopes. I appreciate that. I am a little bit tired. I just came back from Selma, Alabama, early this morning, and I'm still processing that experience. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit with you about a few things. I want to share the kind of origins of where Black Lives Matter comes from. I want to talk about some of the principles and values behind it. And I also want to talk about the national movement and really the international movement that has kind of emerged, right, from 3 little words. And I also want to pose some questions to you as a campus community and as a community who is invested in bringing forward a better world, and a campus community that is invested in connecting with the community around you. And so as I share some thoughts, I would love for you to be thinking about your own experiences. I know on campuses we can get real heady. You get up here, start thinking about facts and figures and all of those things, and I actually want you to think about your life, okay? So I want to start this off by talking a little bit about me and where I come from. And I'm doing that because, I've been hearing a lot over the last few months about a lot of questions about Black Lives Matter. Some of those questions are about, what are the demands? What are you trying to do? And so I hope that I can address some of that by telling a story. So first and foremost, I think it's important to understand the political conditions that I came up in. I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up during the reign of Reagan. And I grew up in a time and space, I'm born and raised in the Bay Area. I came up in a time and space where many of the gains that my parents and my grandparents fought for were being intentionally eroded. Okay. Ronald Reagan, not a great actor, but a brilliant strategist and politician who was part of a larger movement, right? A larger kind of right-wing conservative movement to undermine the rights that women had fought for, that queer people had fought for, that Black and Latino and Asian people had fought for, Indigenous people had fought for, and that's my political context. So growing up, I came up during some of the anti-immigrant legislation that is impacting people today. I came up during the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? And the kind of demise of the idea that there were any alternatives to a system that allows people to sleep on the streets. I came up also in the time of a rapid decline in the vibrancy of a Black liberation movement that changed this country. I grew up in a time where the impacts of COINTELPRO could be felt very deeply. And for those of you who don't know about COINTELPRO, it was a government-sponsored program, government-designed program, geared towards undermining liberation movements in this country. So what does that mean? It means a government-sponsored program that targeted activists and organizers. And by targeting, I mean raiding their homes. I mean, in some cases, assassinating them. I mean creating divisions and fissures within organizations. splitting up families. It's okay, I love the babies. It means disappearing activists. So that's what COINTELPRO did. That was its intention, and it was incredibly successful. I also came up during the time where, quite frankly, there was a real push back away from a global community that was connected not only in spirit, but in culture and tradition, conditions, right? A real push away from that, back towards every person for themselves. Every person for themselves. So if you were someone who was not a citizen of this country, when I was growing up, right, there were laws being passed, not just by Republican presidents, but Democratic ones as well, that said that you could not receive any support from anyone having to do with the government. Okay. I came up in the time of what was called the Personal Responsibility Act, okay, otherwise known as welfare reform. Okay. That literally said that you're on your own. And so as someone who came up in those conditions, born and raised in the Bay Area, Marin County, to an interracial family, and as someone who came into consciousness relatively early in my life, I came up in a time of increasing conservatism, but I also longed for and yearned for the stories that my mom told me, and my grandmother told me, and the stories that I read about in my school books, right? Where there was a vibrant movement to recognize the fundamental humanity of us. And as I looked around, right, the reason that I lay out these conditions to you is because as I looked around, I saw firsthand the impacts, right, of the onslaught against a once incredibly vibrant and powerful movement for the freedom of all of us. So when I looked around in my hometown and in Oakland and in the Bay Area, where many civil rights leaders still live, and we would ask them, we would say, can you come and talk to us? How did you build this movement? What was it like? How do we get back there? Folks would say, I mean, I'm happy to come talk to you, but we don't talk anymore. Sometimes people would say, I can't talk about it. It's too painful. And so that's the context in which we talk about Black Lives Matter, right? It's very simple. It's a very simple concept, right? But it is a continuation of work that has been happening not just since August 9th, not even just since Oscar Grant, right? But quite literally, since Black people were brought to this country from Africa. I want to talk a little bit about where Black Lives Matter comes from, now that you know where I come from and how I'm thinking and what I'm thinking about. So, in 2013, Trayvon Martin was murdered. He was killed in his community in Sanford, Florida. He left his mother's home. He was on the phone with someone. We don't know if that was his girlfriend or not. That's not our business, you know what I'm saying? It was a friend. They went to the store to get snacks, Skittles, and an iced tea. Somewhere on his trip to the store that was just a few blocks from his mother's home, he was seen and identified by a person called George Zimmerman, who was not a security officer. He was an aspiring neighborhood watch person. George Zimmerman looked at Trayvon and decided that Trayvon didn't belong where he was, that he was somehow suspicious. And so he followed Trayvon. He even called 911. The dispatcher told him, stop following that child. He continued to follow Trayvon. Somewhere in between leaving that store on the way back home, there was a confrontation between a child and an adult, and a child lost their life. Now, when Trayvon was killed, it didn't make national news. Should have. Should have. I remember reading about it and wondering why people weren't more upset. Why do we live in a world where we normalize the killing of children? Sometime after, there was a trial, and I watched that trial judiciously. It was like watching the OJ trial for me. That might be before your time. It's okay, no. I watched it religiously. I watched as the mainstream media tried to find a reason why Trayvon's life was taken. The first story that the media tried to tell was that Trayvon had been smoking weed, and so somehow that made him more violent. I'm not gonna bust y'all out. But what I am gonna say is, y'all know that ain't true. The next thing, when that didn't work, the next thing they tried to do was somehow find something wrong with Tracy and Sabrina, his parents. Somehow figure out where they had failed in their parenting. Now, can you imagine, those of you who are parents, can you imagine having your child taken from you and wanting to understand why, and then turning on the news and hearing that it's your fault? That somehow there was something that you didn't do. Then the media tried to show pictures of Trayvon with his hood on that they knew would appeal to the fear that lives in many of us for various reasons. Because somehow there had to be a way that a 16-year-old child could be responsible for their own death. Instead of there being a way for us to deeply look at it ourselves as a society that would even entertain the idea that a 16-year-old child headed to the store from their parents' house could somehow be responsible for their own death. Now, as you all know, George Zimmerman was acquitted. And the day of the verdict, I was sitting with friends at a bar, and we were having a long conversation about what we thought was going to happen. Now, I'm somebody who believes that the criminal justice system in this country is not just. I believe that the criminal justice system works exactly as it's designed to work. I don't think it's broken. That's me. But I still wished for an aberration, for something different to happen. Now, I'm not somebody who thinks that jails are the solution. But I can say I surely did want that man to be held accountable for the murder of a child. And as we thought together about what might happen, even though we know that the criminal justice system works exactly as it's designed to work, we thought maybe he'll be charged with something. It might not be murder. It might be manslaughter of some type. But when I heard that George Zimmerman had been acquitted, it was as if I had gotten punched in the gut. I didn't know Trayvon. I didn't know his family. Never been to or heard of Sanford, Florida. But I do have a younger brother. He's 25, 6'4", hair out to here. I pick stuff out of it sometimes, because he's a boy. He's really sweet, gentle, would not, has never hurt a fly. He skateboards. He's an artist, cartoonist. He's a videographer. Incredibly talented. I couldn't figure out how to talk to him about the fact that even though he is the sweetest person on earth, that growing up in a place like Marin County, which is not unlike Sanford, Florida, that I can't protect him. I can't explain to him that even though he's so sweet, that even though he would never hurt a fly, that somebody could take his life because of their own irrational fear. Now you understand that that's what a lot of us hold every day. As Black people, that's what we hold every day. I know many 6-foot-tall Black men who try to figure out how to make themselves smaller every day so that you are not scared. I know many Black people who try to alter ourselves in some way, shape, or form to make you more comfortable. And so that night, when I thought about my brother, 6 feet tall, who is grappling with his understanding of racism in this country, because of course, where he lives, nobody talks about race. We just act on race. But I couldn't find the words. I watched people leaving that bar that night. I couldn't move or say anything. I was paralyzed. And I watched people leave after the verdict was announced. I watched how Black people left that bar, shoulders down, head down, no eye contact. My friends and I sat together, and we didn't have words for each other. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. So I thought maybe somebody else has something brilliant to say, because I can't find it. And so people have a lot to say. Because remember, those of us with some relative level of consciousness, we think about these things. And then we dump it on the Word document called Facebook. And so, what I saw didn't please me. Now my conscious friends did that thing, y'all know that system don't work for us. Why is everybody so upset? I could feel that. It wasn't doing anything for me. Then there were my subconscious folk, and then other homies. They could acknowledge that this, not only was a terrible tragedy, not only was this the way the system worked, but that we needed to do something about it. And that got me excited, until I got to the part that was about what folks thought we needed to do about it. The answers ranged. Vote. Get educated. Pull up your pants. Get a better job. Because clearly that's the way for us to eliminate a cancer that has plagued our society for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's how we got here. And so in my pain, in my wondering, my questioning about how I was going to talk to my baby brother, and amidst all the cynicism that I was reading about and hearing, I decided to do something else, which was write a love letter to Black people. To remind us that we are more than enough. To remind us that we have the human right to walk to the store, pants around your ankles or not, and expect to come home alive. To remind us that it's not about whether or not you vote. It's not about how much education you have. It's not even about whether or not you have a hoodie on or not. But fundamentally, it's about living in a society where our lives don't matter. My love note said, we do matter. And that it's not our job to fix ourselves for other people when we didn't create what was broken in the first place. And in ending that rant, I said something to the degree of, Black people, I love you, I love us, we matter, our lives matter, Black lives matter. And then my girl Patrice, who's in Los Angeles, also on Facebook, also looking for answers. She put a hashtag in front of it. I guess as a way for people to keep following the conversation. And she said to me, we should start an organizing project. Because the trauma of living in a world where our lives don't matter is enough to make us not want to fight to be free. And so, can we create space for us to love on each other and support each other? And then a few days later, my sister Opal said, this is brilliant. And I have all these skills in technology. Now I said I can use Facebook because it's like a Word document. It's very simple. Twitter, I'm still learning. It's been 6 years. She said, let's build out some platforms online so that more people can join the conversation, so people can connect to each other and collaborate together, often. And that is the birth story of Black Lives Matter. Now, today, Black Lives Matter is organized in 23 cities, including Ontario, Canada, including locations in Ghana. It's not just a hashtag. It is an organizing principle. It is actual real people strategizing together in real time. We can touch each other now. This isn't Skype, Google Hangout, or any of those things. To figure out how it is that we rid our country of state-sanctioned violence. It's bigger than police. State-sanctioned violence has a lot of different forms. Policing is the one that's most visible to us right now. Now, I want to say a few things because we started this project and there were many more killings. Jordan Davis, Renisha McBride, Mike Brown, Akai Gurley, Ayanna Stanley Jones, she was 7. There were many more murders. And we kept hearing things like, well, why Black lives? Don't all lives matter? Yeah, they do. You can tweet that. I said it. And we live in a country where every 28 hours, a Black person is murdered by police, vigilantes, or security guards. That's from a report from the Malcolm X grassroots movement. Now, I've heard, well, I don't like their methodology. Okay. PolicyLink just released a map just a few weeks ago of police killings of Black people in this country in 2014, of which there were over 300. And when you do that math, you will see every 28 hours, a Black person, man, woman, child, or somewhere in between, is murdered by police, vigilantes, or security officers. So yes, all lives matter, theoretically. That's the world that we are all fighting to live in. We don't live in that world right now. We live in a world where some lives matter more than others. So, if we really believe that all lives matter, that means this is our time to fight for Black lives. Because Black lives are under serious attack in this country. Now, I want to address something else, because I hear that on anonymous sites where you don't have to own your comments, people say pretty nasty stuff. So let me say this. People say, well, why don't you care about Black on Black crime? Those of us that are scholars know the answer to that. What is the difference between Black on Black crime or any other kind of crime? But must separate, we will know that there are more white folks killing each other than there are black folks killing each other. But that's statistical. Let's get philosophical for a second. Now, Martin Luther King said, people love Martin Luther King, so let me just go ahead real quick. Brother Martin said, on this very question, he called it intercommunal violence. He said we must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, and the philosophy which produced the murderers. Another way of saying it is we love to talk about crabs in a barrel without acknowledging that the barrel is not the crab's natural habitat. AKA, a society, a country founded through the legacy of violence perpetuates violence in various forms. And if we don't address that legacy, we can't address its impacts and its effects. But I digress. Black Lives Matter is an attempt to rebuild a vibrant movement in this country for our very humanity. It is at stake. And I mean that. When we can watch a man being choked to death on video by the very people who we pay to protect us, there's something very wrong. When a 93-year-old grandmother is murdered in her home by the very people who are meant to protect us, something is very wrong. When a 7-year-old child, a 12-year-old child, a 17-year-old child is murdered by the very people who are supposed to protect us, something is very wrong. Just yesterday, on my way home from Selma, sitting in this very small airport, it's not actually bigger than this room, and I'm watching CNN. That's all it was. There was another murder yesterday. DeKalb County, Georgia. A man, emotionally distressed, in his own neighborhood, naked, shot more than 5 times by the police. Just last week, a boy killed in front of his own home. Something's wrong. This is not a conversation to say that police are bad. Some of us have family members and loved ones who are law enforcement personnel. This isn't about individual people. This is about the system and the society that produces them. When some of the most fundamental underpinnings of your work are to tag some people as threats, it's hard for us to swallow. It's hard for them to swallow. Which is why you have a lot of emotional distress inside of law enforcement. People will tell you, I've changed since I took this job. I started this career because I wanted to help people. And now I don't know what's happened to me. So that's the time that we're living in. That's the time. Because I hate to say this, but taking it back really quickly to Selma, I too am a student of history, and while I was not alive, one thing I do know was that what people died for on that bridge was not about the right to vote. What people died for on that bridge was the right to humanity, of which at that time, voting was a tactic to achieve your humanity, to make decisions over your own life. That is what people died for on that bridge. To be able to live with some dignity. Today, what people are fighting for is to be able to live with dignity. And frankly, we should thank them. We should thank each and every one of you who took a risk, who died in, who marched, who protested. Because it's you who are fighting for the rest of us. You are the real MVP, as they say. Now, sometimes, I have about 5 minutes left. Timing myself because I could go. Sometimes it's hard for us to grapple with the fact that we face such big challenges. For some of us, it's annoying. Why do we have to talk about this? Why can't we just be? Just be cool to each other, man. What's the big deal? People's lives are at stake. People have lost family members and loved ones, been threatened themselves. But also, quite frankly, how do we live in a world predicated on social justice if there is no justice? How do we celebrate a democracy when people can't participate? This is what people are fighting for. What's important for us to understand about this moment is that the challenges are great. They're vast, but we're brilliant. We're incredibly brilliant. We're better than what we've been, and our grandparents and our parents have made that possible. It's up to each of us to carry on the legacy that was begun for us. Because what's at stake, right? What's at stake is the stories that we're gonna tell. My mom says, I wish we could have done more, but I'm so proud of what you're doing. And I want to be able to say to my kids, I never stopped doing more. And I'm so proud of you for doing something. Now, I want you all to know that you're not alone. Colombia, Spain, France, Japan, Italy, South Africa, Alaska, Lewiston, Maine. Seriously, sizable Somali community there. New Somali community who stood up in a post-mill town and said, our lives matter. It's a beautiful thing. Each of us here are making history. We are creating history. Now, when we think about what our next steps are as a team, we should be thinking about not the facts and the figures. What do I want my school to feel like? What do I want my home to feel like? What do I want my neighborhood to feel like when we get to the place where we're trying to go? Ask yourselves, when Black Lives Matter, what will my campus look like? What will the conversations be that I'm having with my family? What will our government look like? Our economy? That's how we'll know we got there. And then we do the work every day to get there. That's our North Star. So, we have lots more to talk about. But I want to thank you again for having me. I want to thank you for your courage and your bravery. And I want to tell you that we're winning. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia, for your insights and your perspectives. At this time, I would like to introduce our faculty and student panelists and invite them to continue the conversation with Alicia at this time. So if you can come up and take your seat. Thinking rather than introducing you all, that you can introduce yourself. And also, if you have any comments that you would like to share at this time that stood out for you as you were listening to Alicia, that would be my offering. So if you could please start with introducing yourselves first and then any comments.
Hello. My name is Rachel Hartley. I am a sophomore here at the college, and I am also on the executive team for the Black Student Union. I work for the Intercultural Center as an ID leader or intercultural development leader. And yeah, that's my intro. So hello, thank you all for coming.
Hi, everybody.
Hey. Hi.
How you doing tonight?
Good.
All right. My name is Cliff Lee. I'm an assistant professor in the single subject teacher ed program in the School of Education, trying to educate the future secondary teachers. And I was really fortunate to be invited to this panel, and I'm excited to have a discussion with y'all.
Hi, I'm Mary McCall. I'm a professor here and have been a professor in the psychology department, ethics studies department as well, and graduate counseling now too.
So, as I was listening to Alicia, there were so many thoughts that I had, and I'm just curious what thoughts came up for you all that were listening, that's here on the panelists, that you would like to maybe highlight that was impactful for you.
Well, I thought everything was great. I found myself at some points just looking down, just being angry, you know. I get angry a lot when it comes to this topic, but I think that what resonated with me the most was the flashback of hearing the verdict of Trayvon Martin's murder. I think that you telling your story and where you were, I think that everyone, especially Black people, we knew where we were when we heard that. It's kind of like when they ask you, where were you when the World Trade Centers hit? And everybody can give a story of where they were sitting, what they were eating, or whatever, you know. That's how it was for me hearing the verdict, and it was hard to reflect. And sometimes I don't like to think about it. I don't want to think about that time. But all I do remember is that I was sitting with my family and we were really quiet. We didn't have anything to say. And I think that was the scariest thing, because it was like, well, I guess this is it. You know, this is it. And it was my first instance of being told how it was to be Black in America. And I can't remember how old I was at that time. It was a couple years ago. I was in high school. But even then, I never really had any like real like instance of you're Black in America. That was it for me. And I wanted people to know how it felt. And I didn't know how to make them know how it felt because they didn't want to recognize it, you know? So I think that was the thing that hurt me the most, and having to hear it again, it was just like a bad memory. So, yeah.
You know, I want to follow that and talk about also my experience of when I found out. And interestingly enough, my wife and I were at a party for a friend that we weren't super tight with, but we had found out. We just checked our Facebook. We knew the verdict was gonna come out that night, and it was a celebration at a party, right? And it was among, I would say, some different friends than we normally hang out with. And we were pissed, you know, when we found out, and we're sad. We had a mix of all different emotions. And for my wife and I, you know, we've been working in the educational sector and social work sector in East Oakland for over a decade at that point. And so when we started telling other people at this party about how frustrated we were shocked by the responses. And honestly, it's kind of like you talked about some of the anonymous responses, and these are some people we have known for a long time, but it just really hit home the different sectors of America and how different people react differently based on their experiences. And, you know, to be honest, there were a lot of folks that were, I would say upper middle class background, different ethnic groups, but the majority was white. My wife is Latina, I'm Asian, and we had been working with Black youth, brown youth for so many years that when we heard about Trayvon initially, we saw him as one of our students, our friends, you know, family members. And so to see the reaction of other people that's just like, oh man, well, how do you know about the facts? And, you know, just your typical responses of like questioning, believing the state-run media more or less of their side of what happened, questioning about the actual incident and what was in his pocket, was he acting suspicious? And we're just blown away that like, man, we have completely diametrically opposite reactions than some of these folks. And that really just made me feel like there are so many different parts of America that, you know, the fact that y'all are in this room, it says something. And who's not here? You know, those that are, you know, got the email, that found out about this event, maybe they've heard about it. And so, you know, I just think about like, how do we educate those individuals that aren't here and part of this conversation and hearing about Alicia Garza's story to get them to understand what it's like for other people in this country.
I have a lot of thoughts and reactions, particularly as a white person who's lived my whole life in Oakland. I think we're in the same neighborhood, actually. And thinking about, as a mother of two sons, like Tammy, and realizing I will never have to have that conversation. What does that mean? What does that mean for my friend Tammy? I don't have to worry about my kids going out. That's, like you said, that is, was just so close to home of saying, what is the reality that I live with and that my kids can live with? That other people have to face things I will never know. And I've spent my whole life working on social justice. I was raised that way with my parents. And it just really brought it home. How lucky I am. And what does that mean, lucky, right? And thinking about, as a social justice activist, what's my role here? I mean, there was a lot in the media when the first marches started in Berkeley and Oakland about the role of white people in this movement. And the irony of white people with a megaphone walking down the street saying, whose streets? Our streets. Like, duh. They are our streets. That's the point. So why are we reclaiming them? And for who? I mean, the arrogance that we have also really made me think about what's my role, right? It's not to be at the front of the movement in any way, shape, or form, unless I'm asked, as I'm honored to be asked in this kind of forum, to sit here and share some thoughts. But what is my role? How do I talk to other white people about what this means, right? How do I, as I continue my life's journey as a social justice activist, how do I take responsibility for my own education? And not ask Alicia, can you just tell me some more? And Rachel, can you just tell me what it's like to be a Black student on this campus? What am I doing to educate myself so that then I can have, hopefully, a meaningful conversation? A lot of students of color on this campus say to me, I'm so tired of explaining what it's like, right? So I want to challenge the white people in this room to think about, who are we and where are we in this movement? What is our loss? What is our loss as humans when people are being killed every day? Is that the kind of society I want to live in? One of the things I often think about is the pathology of what white people have to say to ourselves to live every day and read this. How do we think that's okay? Recognizing, I hope, and I want to challenge every student at St. Mary's to use your education to learn more about the social structure and the white supremacist system that we live in, that we are all affected by. And how do I understand my white privilege? But what do I have to say to myself to feel okay about this? And to just go, yeah, that's really hard. Wow, I'm so lucky. Boom, I'm done. I don't ever have to think about it again if I don't want to. I can turn off the news. I cannot read the newspaper. I cannot have friends who are going to remind me what it's like to be a mother of 2 Black sons. So I just want to challenge us to both educate ourselves and to figure out, how do we be brave enough and have the courage enough to have conversations with each other about it. That's where white people need to do the work. How do we challenge other white people when they say, yeah, but those guys with the hoodies, right? I mean, they're probably he was doing something, right? And to be critical thinkers. This is what we're supposed to be teaching you at St. Mary's. When you hear a news story, do you only watch one channel? Do you only read one source? Be critical consumers of information that reinforces stereotypes, that reifies the system that says this is okay. If we in power don't work to dismantle the system of power, I don't want to live in this country. I don't want to be here. Because spiritually, psychically, I can't live with that pain unless I'm doing something with it. I'm teaching a class right now and students talk about white guilt, and I said, that's great. Totally normal reaction. We learn about our privilege, we feel guilty. From my perspective, our guilt is only as good as it's gonna prompt us to action. Because we have the luxury of staying in our guilt and not doing anything about it. When we look at the principles of St. Mary's College, inclusive community, who's here and who's not here? Concern for the poor. Poor is related to racial and ethnic background in this country. Respect for all persons. I can't even say more about that. But, when people are getting shot in our streets. And faith in the presence of God, whether you believe in God or not, where's your sense of humanity and the value of each human life? Divine, not divine, however you see it. That's humanity. And the more we let people's humanity be destroyed by other people, for me, that's destroying my own in the long run.
Alicia, would you want to comment on anything that you just heard, or you would like me to?
There's so much. Yes, I do, and I'll be fast-ish. I was telling somebody this afternoon, that I like to tell stories, because I think stories are what connect us. Stories are what help us get back to what gets us out of bed every day, what we care about. It gets us through the facades that we put on to get through the world. So I hope I showed you that. But I think our stories also tell a lot about what we can do to get free together. And I liked a lot what all of you said about it's not enough to just think about it, be mad about it, right? But that somehow we need to turn that into action. And that action has to be grounded in a deep sense of love for one another. I was also just sitting here thinking about the principle that is important to us in our movement and the work that we're doing, which is around how do we affirm the humanity of every person? And understanding, right, that Black Lives Matter is not just about cis, straight Black people, but that Black Lives Matter is about queer folks, trans folks, disabled folks, poor folks, working class folks, incarcerated folks, right? That we are pushing each other as well to recognize the humanity inside of each other, and to use that as a source of strength, right? Understanding that there are so many folk who have not been invited to participate in movements for social justice, and that really limits our ability to imagine what our freedom can actually look like. And so inviting more of those stories into the room, I think, is really, really, really important. And as a queer woman myself, I know the feeling of telling your story in a space where it has not been friendly. And so I want us to think about that as a campus community, right? How do we create safe space to be able to tell our stories, not for the sake of complaining or whatever, but so we can learn some things. And so that we can connect to people who are different than us. And so we can celebrate difference, not diversity, but difference. Because difference, right, is where all the juiciness lies. We go towards sameness really quickly, right? So humanity is what connects us, right? And it's what we're fighting for. But I'm also fighting for you to be you, and you to be able to be you. and I don't want y'all to be the same. That's boring to me. And then the other thing I just want to lift up and really appreciate is the different experiences within white supremacy of everyone on this panel. And each of you really talked about that, right? You talked about, I'm Asian, my wife is Latina, and we are outraged. We should talk about why, right? You talked about, as a Black woman, I'm outraged. I realized I'm Black in America and what that means to me, and that is deep, right? And then you talked about being a white person, growing up in Oakland, lived in Oakland, we live in the same community. I'm outraged by white supremacy. That's fascinating to me. There's so much richness in here. But what's also powerful about it, right, is that it shows us the places where we can crack the system open. We don't need allies, we need co-conspirators, right? How can we work together to devise something new, something better, using our experiences of what it's like to live under the crappy one, you know?
I just want to build on what Alicia said, and I want to take a line from Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah.
I'm about the action, boss. This very working class, blue collar mentality. That's what I'm talking about, for real. I mean, dialogue is important, and I know this is a good start. And sometimes that's where you have to start. But what are we actually going to do about it?
That's right.
And some of that, one of the things that, as Alicia was talking about, I started thinking about, like, right here at St. Mary's, often we think about these issues as such a global and national thing that's so huge, right? And I think back about our own college right here. I've only been here, this is only my second year here, so I'm relatively new. Some of you probably know this college better than I do. And we need to examine our own culture and community here, and the systems and the institutions that's been in place. What things are set in place have been done just out of legacy that are shutting certain people out. And I know some of you with those snaps, you know what I'm talking about, right? Recently, some of you probably have heard about that fraternity in Oklahoma, about that video that came out where these fraternity members used the N-word repeatedly. And University of Oklahoma president came out harsh, with that letter saying, like, we're not going to stand for this as Sooners, which to me, there's just so much irony that Sooners, I don't know if you know what that means, but you might want to look that up to how ludicrous that they're talking about being prideful as Sooners, talking about racial, derogatory names. But, the point is that he came out saying, like, this is a zero tolerance campus, but if you really think about it, how is it zero tolerance if this university system produced these types of students? You didn't do a very good job, apparently, right? And so, oftentimes what happens in these situations, they come out hard, they, maybe they let go, maybe they shut down the fraternity, mix for splashy news. Maybe they might create a diversity committee, maybe hire a new associate dean of diversity issues. It looks good on paper, it looks good in the news. We rubber stamped it, check off that box, we took care of that issue, right? But it doesn't really address the systemic institutionalized issues that's at play in the system. The policy is still the same, admissions is no different. There's no new scholarship or retention type policies and procedures or programs in place to really change the culture of the institution. And that's what I'm talking about. When you go around in the various different, in your classes, I know I'm probably gonna get some beef for this, especially being a newer professor, but I mean, look at in your classes, like what happens in those settings? Are there places where you can see there are clear biases happening? And sometimes it's real, subtle, and you might not see it as obvious as those types of videos. Those are rare, those overt, racist types of situations. You really need to examine the structures in place, like maybe it might be as, behind the scenes. Maybe you work in a job on campus and you know some of the numbers and some of the budget and how funding goes to certain things and not others. Ask those questions. Why is $20,000 allocated for this over this? Oh, a typical answer might be, oh, that's just how it's always been. Well, why? You know, why has it always been that way, and who does it benefit really? If we genuinely, our institution, talk about Lassallean principles, go back to that, argument. This is what our school is founded on. You can't argue with that. Is it really concern for the poor? We got poor students right here. So how do we support them, right? So I'll stop with that.
Since we're talking about college and universities and things like that, I am a college student. I am a Black college student. I am a Black female college student on a white campus that caters to white students, particularly white cisgender males, but we can get into that conversation later. I have a message for St. Mary's. Stop saying all lives matter. I said it. We know. We know. All lives do matter. And if you didn't think all lives matter, then that's another conversation as well. But we're talking about Black ones right now, because Black ones don't matter in this country, and they didn't matter when they were brought to this country. So we're talking about Black ones right now, so that's where I'm gonna start off from. Know that it is hard to be a Black student on an all-white campus. It's difficult going to class, walking to class, sitting in class, knowing that all day I will be talking and learning about white people. And then I will leave that class being learning about white people and go to the cafeteria and be disregarded, be cut in line, be looked at funny. Someone will grab their Louis Vuitton bag thinking that I am going to steal from them because apparently I need your bag. People will drag their children away from me because apparently I am a dangerous person. That's what happens on this campus. And no matter how much you want to believe that Moraga is a beautiful bubble full of ponies and rainbows and people with their puppies walking around, that's the Moraga that is set up for white people, not people of color. So the next time you go into class and you see that one Black person in your class and that one topic is being brought up about Martin Luther King, do not look at them because they already feel uncomfortable. The next time you hear a Black person say Black lives matter, do not attack them with, but what about me? Because you are matter in this country. And the next time you see a protest or something going on, try to ask about it. Try to say, hey, I want to learn more about this. Because we're not going to bite you, we're not going to be angry, but we're going to be mad if you say things that hurt our feelings. That's not okay. All lives matter, of course, but know that Black ones are disregarded. That's all I have to say, St. Mary's.
Okay, at this time, I would like to welcome the audience perspective and invite you to ask Alicia any questions that you may have. We will be using the microphone that's here, so please line up now if you have questions.
Hey, can I just add something? I want to go metacognitive here real quick and just point out, no, seriously, just to point out, do you notice that Mary, when we walked up, she deliberately waited till the end. She purposely gave Rachel the mic first and then me, and then she took it. These aren't just happenstance that she made these decisions. This is very deliberate. She's very conscientious of these actions as what she talked about. And I just want to point that out, for those of you who are still trying to understand your place in how to be part of this movement.
Thank you. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you for coming here. I really appreciate hearing your guys' perspectives and everything you guys had to say. It's also really cool to hear about things that have happened and what the movement is doing right now. My question is, where are we going to go with it? What's the future of Black Lives Matter? And not as important right now, but to a larger extent, all the other movements that are happening, all the other injustices that you see, how are we going to work together to really change, to appeal to everybody, to not just be, not a limited perspective, but a singular perspective? That's my question.
Yes or no?
Yes, please.
Where do you want to go?
Me personally?
Yeah.
You said something about fundamental humanity. And where I'd like to go is, how can you appeal to everybody's fundamental humanity? Question what that means to each individual person, and figure out, is there something that is fundamental about every single person on this planet? And can that be used to unite us and to see the similarities within the differences of every single person?
Yes and no. I'll just be 100% honest. So what connects us through our diversity and our differences is that we need each other to survive. But, does everybody know that? No. Is everybody gonna get that and the world is gonna become a utopia? No. I'm being honest. I think what we can hope for is a majority. And I think what's exciting to me, and I'm not trying to like pull the rug out from underneath us, but we can choose to live differently. That's where we're going, is choosing to live differently. So speaking when you haven't been able to speak, fighting back when you haven't felt like you could. But then I think there's also something different, which is about building power, which is not just about having conversations. This is about consciousness raising, right? Us all getting on the same page. But then we have to change things. And that doesn't just require conversation, it requires political power, social power, economic power, and that's what we're trying to unlock right now. And the way that we get there is through organizing. And organizing is fundamentally about building relationships. And building the kinds of relationships that acknowledge that we need each other to survive. So I hope that wasn't too circular, but
No, that makes perfect sense.
that's my truth.
In a very convoluted way.
Thank you. Next person, please.
Okay, so we were talking a little bit about needing co-conspirators,
Yes.
not just allies.
Yes.
I grew up in a state where there was no diversity. I knew 2 African American people from basically from the 3 from the time I was in elementary school through high school. And when I came to St. Mary's campus, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many different colors and different people, and I was just so excited because that's where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
But then I started trying to ask people because I had never been around, and I had read all of these things in my little bubble. I had tried to educate myself as much as possible, but I wanted to know about people's experiences. And I came across a situation one day where someone kind of got angry at me and said, well, you're never going to know how it's like. And my thought was, well, yeah, I'm never ever going to get it. And so I want to try and tell me what to do, tell me what you want me to do. So what is your advice for people who are trying their utmost to be co-conspirators in this movement and do suffer from the white guilt and are fully in acknowledgement every day of their white privilege, but really just want to help as best we can?
I have a quick thought, and then I want to pass it to my co-conspirator here. I think you're really brave. What's your name?
Monica?
Monica, thank you for being so brave. So here's the thing. To be a co-conspirator, you need to be brave and you need to take risks. Here's the thing, and it's also not a popular thing to say. Some of the learning that you're looking for comes through building relationships also. And I think there's a way in which in social justice movements we can do this thing where it's like people of color over here and white folks over here, and like everybody just don't touch each other or touch each other with kid gloves, and that's not cute. We're not trying to like reverse the dynamic. That's not transformative, right? But what we do need, right, is we need the kind of movement where white folks are conscious and courageous and risk-taking, yeah? And then we also need the kind of movement that is looking towards transformation and not just being reformist. And being reformist is basically like people of color on the top and white folks in the back. That doesn't actually change the dynamic of power, right? So I just want to say that as a precursor because I think it's important, because I think sometimes people get stuck in this thing about being afraid to say the wrong thing, being afraid to do the wrong thing, and so then they just don't do anything. Yeah, so like keep taking risks, being mindful, being honest, being grounded in a real love, not a tokenism, right? But a real love for yourself, for what is possible, and for that person.
Hi, Monica. We need to have lunch. Any other white people in this room that want to have lunch? I'm buying. You are really brave. Really. It's a journey. We're never going to get there. We're never going to understand, right, what it means to be a person of color in this country. But what we can do is show up over and over and over again and listen and learn and ask other white people sometimes and figure out when you can ask and what you can ask of people of color that you're working with. And that sometimes you get hurt, sometimes you get name called, sometimes you get people being pissed off at the arrogance of you asking them to educate you. Okay? Right? Sometimes we're gonna get, what the hell are you doing here, and what do you think? You even have the right to be here. Okay? So it takes courage to say, my goal is not to be friends with everybody. My goal is not to expect respectful treatment from someone who has been disrespected their entire lives. And mostly by people who look like me and you, okay? So I've got to be able to take that, and my experiences of that have made me, when I take them and reflect on them and really take them in, made me more empathetic to what it feels like, and imagine what Rachel said, all day long. Residence hall, dining hall, walking down the halls, in the classroom. Right, so if I have one of those experiences every 6 months, right, when I think of what my bravery is compared to Rachel's and Cliff's and Alicia's and Tammy's, I have no right to go, God, it hurt my feelings. It can hurt my feelings, okay, move on. Because for us, if we really want transformation, we have a higher goal than any one interaction. So I can get rejected and I'm still gonna go back and I'm gonna show up. And I was telling someone the other day, we were talking about this process of understanding our white privilege, and I said, I went through a period where everywhere I went, I didn't say anything, because I was like, I'm gonna be that stupid white person again, saying something and people were like, what are you talking about? So I just didn't say anything, and then I said, well, wait a minute, if I'm not saying anything, I'm not helping, I'm not growing, I'm not moving. Right? And so I had to say, no, you need to open your mouth now and take with it what I get. Right? I got a whole pile of books, 2 big backpacks full of books on white privilege that I just brought to my class before I came over here. So you can come to my office and we'll go through those and you can borrow one.
That's great.
Before I ask my questions, I just want to say that I was in and out of the room, so if you already addressed them, I apologize. And I also have a quick rant, but it kind of ties in.
Go ahead.
So, just being in this room, I am really happy to see all the different colors, all the different shades, and that was from the back side, mostly noticed by your hair textures. I see so many different people here, whether you're here for a class or your own personal interest. And it's just nice to see that there are a group of individuals on this campus who actually care. Because from my experience and my perspective, as a whole, St. Mary's College of California does not care about Black people. And I witnessed it especially within the last year. St. Mary's does not care about Black people. On this campus as a whole, Black lives do not matter. There are certain departments that care, certain people in certain positions, faculty, staff that care, certain students that care, but as a whole, y'all don't care. This campus does not care. Oh, Edna, what are you talking about? Twitter, Instagram from current students and alums, Facebook, everywhere. Everywhere we are being reminded that on this campus, people do not care about Black lives. And I am personally sick and tired of it. I am sick and tired of feeling like something is wrong with me just because of the color of my skin. I am sick and tired of people devaluing me and telling me that my life doesn't matter just because of how I look. I am sick and tired of the microaggressions that you throw at me and my brothers and my sisters and my in-betweens just because of how we look, something biological that I did not choose. I mean, I would have either way, so I love it.
Yeah.
Something that is natural. That should not matter whatsoever in how we treat people. But because of where we live, it's been conditioned that if you're darker, you don't matter. If you're darker, you're not valued. If you're darker, you're going to be silenced. My first question is, how on this small St. Mary's College of California campus, specifically on this campus, since it is small and intimate, and loving, and SMC cares, conditionally, how can we make it be known that Black lives actually matter? We've held protests, one just yesterday, one last semester, but yet people will go 10 seconds later and post on Yik Yak, making negative comments about BSU. Anyone, how can we actually let people know through our actions that Black lives matter? My second question is, and I think you touched on it, but I think about the room, but even there are Black people but there are Black people and we are saying Black lives matter. How can we make all Black lives matter? Because from my perspective, it seems like only heterosexual, cisgender Black men matter. And I'm tired of having conversations with my roommate, hearing all these stories, and then it's like, oh, well, I don't hear about that. Why am I only hearing about it from you? Why do you seem like you're the only one who actually cares about these people? Why does it seem that because you have an intersecting identity, that your life doesn't matter even though you're Black, even though we're saying Black lives matter? So how can we make all Black lives matter? Because as a woman, I feel like my life doesn't matter even though I am Black. So, end rant, sorry.
They're looking at me like, one, I would challenge every single person in this room to really examine what have you been taught and told about Black people. It's kind of deep. Even what Black people tell each other about us is deep. That's a really interesting place to start. Because I think what happens, and we were talking about this over dinner, is that we focus a lot on the microaggressions, because they're the surface things. But then also, we do this thing with, I'm not racist. All the pearls clutching, right? Or we do that other thing where it's like, everybody's a little bit racist. It's not true. Racism isn't a thing that you can catch. It's not a cold. Racism is not being mean to other people. I hate to break that to folk. If that's all it was, we have so many therapists. We could all just get therapy and dance a little bit more and kick it, be nice to each other. That'd be nice. That's not what it is. Racism is prejudice, discrimination that's backed by institutional power. That's the thing that we're talking about. So I just want to share that with folk. The other thing I think is really important about what you're sharing is that when we think about this question of what have I been taught about Black people, we can examine the question of what does that mean about how I live my life and how I show up. I've heard students talking about people clutching their purses. This yik yak thing is something that I hear on campuses all over the country. I didn't even know what yik yak was. It's kind of cowardly. I mean, real talk, I was just in Alabama, y'all. Folk don't need yik yak. You know what people think about you. I have this thing where, the thing I've just been sitting with a lot is that you're not born like this. Racist, I mean. It's something that we're taught. And I say that to say, right, that it doesn't make you a bad person necessarily. Because what I feel like people understand racism as is like the Ku Klux Klan, which is a form of it, but people don't identify with that. But I think it's important for us to understand, right, that we have ways that we think about each other and interact with each other that impacts people's lives, but the system has a much bigger impact. For example, having to go to a school where you don't feel safe. Some people feel safer than others. Then this question about all Black lives. We got work to do. I'm a cis Black woman who's queer, but you don't know that unless I tell you. Right? People assume, tell me about your husband. My partner's trans, so then that's complicated. We've been married for 11 years. But that's not what people assume. What have we been taught? There's a national conversation that's happening that I think is getting pigeonholed in a really unfortunate way. I'm hearing folks say things like, we're fighting for Black men. We're fighting for humanity. We're fighting for Black people. Black women are being killed. I could read you the names of 10 Black trans folks who have been killed in the last 3 months. And those are only the folks I've heard about. So again, I think there's some work that we can do together. Y'all are already starting that with protests and things like that, and I would encourage you to think about creating the space that you want to see. Can you create some space for folk to talk and build with each other and to support each other? And do you want to invite other folks into that? People who also want to stand with you and support you, right? And then I think there's all the things that folks said about, there's a million things that can be done right now, because this isn't just something that's happening over there. People talk a lot about Ferguson. I'm like, yo, y'all, Ferguson is like this big. And it obscures the fact that St. Louis County as a whole is still basically living under Jim Crow. Ferguson's just a little suburb within that. And we have that same thing happening right here in Oakland. 10 years ago, when I was working with young people in high schools who didn't have books, 1 book per 10 students. So getting your homework done depended on you being able to make a copy of a book, and if somebody didn't bring it back, oh well, right? So I again, when I started my talk earlier, I asked people to think about, where do I fit in this? Let's not make it theoretical, and you're hearing your classmates and your colleagues share their experiences. This isn't what you see on MSNBC. These are your friends, your classmates, your neighbors, your comrades, right? So I don't know that I have an answer to what do we do and how do we do it, because you gotta figure it out. Y'all gotta figure it out. But it starts with having the intention to do it, right?
I really admire your bravery and your voice, so I just want to address that. I always do.
That's
I think I've talked to you about this before, about being a black woman and being a black woman on campus. You know. I think that one thing that needs to be addressed is that not all black people are the same. There's a huge, I know, right? Wow. We're not all the same. We don't all look alike either, just to let you know. But there's this whole circle of different types of black people. And not only are they men, but there are women, there are trans, they are everything in between. And it hurts to know that if I'm saying Black Lives Matter and I'm putting my fist in the air and I'm like, they matter, but my voice is somewhat silenced because I have different genitalia than other black people. That's not fair. That's not okay. Because I know that if in any movement, there's always going to be problems, but that one problem, that needs to change. Because if a black woman can be killed, if a black woman can be shot in the face, if a black woman can be beaten on a highway, if a black woman can be harassed in her car with her children with her, and no one knows, it's not okay. Then it starts to deteriorate the movement. And then it becomes another patriarchal thing. In that women of color live under 2 patriarchies. They live under the white patriarchy. They live under their geographical, like, ethnic patriarchy. That is a thing. And so I think that what my message would be for, like, to answer your question with, it would go out to white men and black men, is that, yes, this is a problem that you need to understand, but understand that women are part of that. And then once we say women are part of that, then that goes into what is a patriarchy. I think you should Google that. Especially if you are a part of it. But yes, Black Lives Matter. And that's all Black Lives Matter. So instead of saying all lives, let's say all Black Lives Matter. Because I think that's the thing. So thank you for addressing that.
Yes.
Most definitely.
Yes.
I just wanted to reiterate what Alicia said about racism. There's a book called Racism Without Racists, which might be of interest to some of you. And I think decolonizing our own minds about what we know, for example, the myth that black men are likely to rape, they're the most likely to rape, and that stems from when they were slaves and they would rape people. Actually, it was the white plantation owners who would rape the female slaves. Okay, so, but that's ingrained in our history, in our psyche, and that's part of why black men walk down the street and I'm like, what are they gonna do to me, particularly as a woman, particularly as a white woman, right? But that's history that's been told and retold and reinscribed in everybody's minds. So we've got to decolonize our own minds and go back and relearn the real history and the variegated and multi-perspective history that is the United States, right? And the other thing I just want to say is to change things at St. Mary's tonight and tomorrow and the next day. Why don't you say hi to the people in your classes and that you work with that you don't say hi to? Right there. You go, oh, I'm being acknowledged by somebody who used to come in and go, right? Be respectful and just say hi.
Yep.
That will change a classroom dynamic. It can change a dining hall dynamic. So I encourage you to try that just once tomorrow. See how it goes.
And I just want to also add, I think you're going there too, but saying hi to also all the different like support staff that make this college happen. I mean, routinely, like folks in the dining halls that clean the dorms, that do all this work, you know, they're just, I don't even see them as people, they just do but that's their job. These are people that, you know, most of them are actually probably not unionized, are contractual employees, and that's a whole another story. And adding to that other point about just like getting educated about some of these issues, you know, I mean, for some of the folks that, if some of these things that we're bringing up is pretty new for you, you know, look up some more information, read about implicit bias, Project Implicit, Black Doll Test. You should read about, you know, I think several times folks have talked about black males having to change the way that they are, either even physically, their actions in different spaces. You really need to read Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. Think about that, Whistling Vivaldi. You have an idea what he's trying to say? That for black men in a predominantly white community or environment, they have to whistle Vivaldi to kind of de-escalate the potential for violence against them. So this is off of some folks that, I know some folks that, a friend that's a professor at Stanford, he talks about multiple examples in Palo Alto that he's experienced this. People never believing that he's a professor at Stanford, because there's no way a black man could be a professor. Mistaking him for the shuttle driver, for custodial staff, for all these different things, but never a professor. So, yeah.
So, who's the author of that book?
Claude Steele.
With the T on the end.
It's on the display.
Oh,
Thank you. So we have time for one more question. You can come up to the mic.
I wanted to say thanks for coming here. I'm really glad I got a chance to hear you speak. It's amazing. And my question is kind of a complicated question, but it's about how you talked about state-sanctioned violence, like as in Ferguson and other examples. And we also talked, I guess, we heard you guys talk about the small things, like Rachel talked about how it's so hard, like walking in the dining hall or like walking on campus in various places. So my question was, how does it get, I mean, it's hard for me to see how like small biases that we all have towards each other become something like as sort of like as state-sanctioned violence, like something small, how does a stereotype become a murder? I was curious what you thought of that.
So funny. You want to start?
Sure. How does a stereotype become violence? It's a very prophetic question. Thank you for asking that. Well, it starts when you're a baby. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it starts when you're a baby. You don't have any biases or, thoughts of color, things like that. You go to school, elementary school, and you find friends, and they're all different colors, but you can't really recognize that because all you want to do is play recess and eat snack. And then you get a little older, and the system that we have starts to resonate with you. And you realize that you are different than your elementary school friends. You realize that, if you are white, you have a privilege, but you may not be able to recognize it, that it is a privilege. And then stereotypes build from the things that you're taught through the media and people around you. And then in extreme cases, you start to think about, well, maybe I am better, or maybe I'm less than. And then in even more extreme cases, it's, well, I am so much more better that I have the right to take them away. I have the right to see them as the other, and if the other isn't here, I will be okay. That's how that happens, at least from what I have seen, from what I have experienced, and what I've learned, is that type of extreme violence is taught, and it is in a system. The police system is a teaching system. It teaches you how to combat criminals, and teaches you how to keep people safe. But what is safe for everyone, Is safe for everyone targeting people of color because you are told that people of color are a problem? Is safe being taught that if you see a black man walking down the street, he must be up to something wrong because of what I was told when I was a child about black people? And then it's being reestablished with my training as an officer, or reestablished when I am a citizen with a gun, So I think that that's where it starts, at least for me. But violence is definitely, at least racial violence, is a systemic thing, and we are taught it as children. So, yeah.
So we have about 2 more minutes before we need to wrap up the evening.
2 minutes for a profound question. I'm going to change your question a little bit, because I think stereotypes are just like the top layer, right? So it was talked about earlier, implicit bias, right? Which is really kind of built in to a lot of the social, economic, political, legal structures that we live under. And I think your question is profound because it's one I ask myself all the time. Like, how did we get here, basically? And so there's a couple of things that I want to just kind of lift up, especially as it relates to policing, but I think it also applies to poverty, it applies to anything you can think of, really. So I'm going to do that by telling a quick story. So today I was meeting with some folks from the Department of Justice, right? They just released the Ferguson report, where they found that there's patterns and practices within the Ferguson Police Department that target black folks. Now, some of what they found, right, as evidence of that, were emails and things that people said to each other about black folks. And that was just like the tip of the iceberg. What they also found was that Ferguson police were using policing to basically disenfranchise people, to punish people, and to scare people from doing basic things and having access to basic things. And in fact, Ferguson, as a suburb, was being funded off the backs of poor black people. So much so that, for example, St. Louis is made up of 91 municipalities, which is basically like towns, right? And a majority of those 91 municipalities have their own police departments. They're real small, like blocks or like a mile. So literally in a day, you could get a ticket in 5 different municipalities and not have gone more than 5 miles. And then if you can't pay those tickets, they turn into bench warrants. And when you can't pay the bench warrant, you go to jail. And when you go to jail, you have a record. Yeah? Okay. The other thing that happens when you have a record, well, whether you have a record or not, frankly, another thing that happens when you're black in a place like St. Louis is that you're considered a criminal no matter what. And so the way that bias turns into violence, right, is that bias is used to make decisions about how to interact with people. And sometimes those decisions can cost you your life. For example, Mike Brown. The official story, and I know, okay, if I get hate mail from people who watch Fox News, I'm gonna lose it. Okay, listen. Mike Brown, according to the store owner, did not steal cigarillos from the liquor store. Store owner said 3 times on record, I did not call the police for a robbery. He paid for what he bought. It's also on the security tapes. It shows there was a struggle inside the store. Likely because somebody said, did you steal that? And he said, no, I didn't steal it. And they got in an altercation. We don't have the sound from that video, but that's what I see. Neither here nor there. Leaves the store with his friend, walks down the street. If you've ever been to the community where he was murdered, it's like an apartment complex, but it's bigger. Meaning, pretty much who's in there is who lives there. So, they're walking down the middle of the street. It's not a lot of traffic. It's not a busy thoroughfare. How did Mike Brown come into contact with Darren Wilson? He and his friend are walking down the middle of the street. Darren Wilson drives by, reverses the car, and says, get the F out of the street. That's how their interaction began. How does a stereotype turn itself into violence? You can see how that story played out, right? There's another question about, would Darren Wilson have had that conversation if Mike Brown wasn't black? And is that the way that we want law enforcement to interact and engage with our communities, right? So there's some big questions, I think, within your question, but the solution side of it and the vision part that I want to raise to us as folks who are of voting age, you should vote. I'm not trying to tell you you shouldn't vote, you should. It's important. What do we want policing to look like? What's policing for? Is it for problem solving? Or is it for criminalization? Now, if it's to make, create, and punish so-called criminals, we're doing a good job. We can all just go home now. But if it's to solve problems, then we can have some ideas about what needs to be shifted, right? Sorry.
That's okay, thank you. That's okay. Thank you so much.